As the Vanguard fleet hummed to life, Admiral Alana Novak stood on the bridge of the flagship, her determined eyes fixed on the display. The weight of her mission settled heavily on her shoulders, but she bore it with the grit of a seasoned leader. She watched as the elite crew filed onto the bridge, each hand-picked for their skills and dedication. Lieutenant Johnny Thomas strode in, his face hardened and eyes burning with a quiet intensity. The loss of his sister drove him, fueling a tenacity that Novak recognized all too well. Captain Marcus Reeves followed close behind, his weathered face a map of past battles and hard-won victories. Novak knew the ghosts that haunted him, the same specters that clung to many of the crew. In the hangar bays below, teams of engineers and technicians swarmed over the ancient warships, retrofitting them with modern weaponry and shielding. The ships were relics of a bygone age, but the advanced technology woven into their hulls still outstripped anything Earth had developed in the centuries since. Novak ran a hand along the command console, feeling the thrum of power beneath her fingertips. On Zephyria, Governor Lena Arany paced the length of her office, her mind racing. The murder of the human child had ignited a powder keg of tensions between the human colonists and the Adoshan natives. Arany understood the humans' rage, the demand for justice that burned in their hearts. Yet she also saw the fear and resentment simmering in the eyes of her own people, the Adoshans who felt their world slipping away. In the shadows of the capital, Odin lurked, nursing his wounds and his anger. He was a weapon, forged in the fires of the Orcs warrior culture, and honed to a deadly edge by the Tyrant Empire. But even a weapon could doubt its purpose. As he cleaned his blades, Odin's thoughts drifted to the Overseer, the enigmatic figure who pulled his strings. The Overseer's words echoed in his mind, a reminder of his mission to sow chaos and discord. Light years away, the Vanguard fleet plunged into the void, the ancient engines propelling them toward their fateful rendezvous. Admiral Novak stood resolute, her eyes fixed on the stars streaking past the viewscreen. She knew the risks, the danger that awaited them at the end of their journey. But she also knew the strength of the men and women under her command, the unbreakable spirit that had carried humanity through the darkest of times. On the bridge, a comm officer suddenly straightened in his seat, his voice taut with urgency. "Admiral, we're receiving a distress call on an encrypted channel. It's from an Adosian rebel group." Novak's brow furrowed as she listened to the message, her mind racing with possibilities. An alliance with Adosian rebels was a gamble, but one that could turn the tide in their favor. She weighed the risks, the potential for betrayal, against the chance to strike a blow against the Empire. In the end, there was only one choice. Novak turned to her crew, her voice ringing with authority. "Set a course for the rendezvous point. We have a new ally to meet and a reckoning to deliver." As the Vanguard fleet angled toward the distant moon, Novak knew that the true test lay ahead. The Empire's shadow loomed large, and the specter of war hung heavy in the air. But for now, there was only the mission, the next step in a journey that would shape the fate of galaxies. The Vanguard fleet emerged from the void at the remote moon, the ancient drives thrumming as they decelerated into orbit. Admiral Novak stood on the bridge, her eyes locked on the interface as a small, battered craft detached from the moon's shadow. The ship bore the markings of the Adosian rebellion, a coiled serpent devouring its own tail. The craft docked with the flagship, and moments later, a lithe figure strode onto the bridge, flanked by a quartet of armed rebels. Zara, leader of the Adosian resistance, met Novak's appraising gaze with a defiant tilt of her chin. The wounds of her people were etched into the hard lines of her face, the scars of a lifetime spent fighting. In the briefing room, Zara laid out the plan, her words sharp and precise. Odin, the Empire's enforcer, was scheduled to meet with his handler, a shadowy figure known only as the Overseer. The meeting would take place on Korux Prime, in the heart of enemy territory. It was a chance to strike a blow against the Empire, to capture not just Odin, but the Overseer himself. Lieutenant Thomas leaned forward, his eyes alight with a fierce intensity. "I'll lead the infiltration team," he said, his voice unwavering. "Odin is mine." Novak studied the young officer, seeing the pain that drove him, the need for vengeance that burned in his heart. But there was something else there too, a steely persistence that reminded her of herself at that age. As the team prepared for the mission, the comm officer's voice crackled over the intercom. "Admiral, we've intercepted an encrypted transmission from the Empire's fleet. They know we're here." Novak's fists tight as she listened to the decoded message. The Empire was sending reinforcements to protect their assets. The clock was ticking. On Orcs Prime, the infiltration team moved through the shadows, their disguises flawless. Lieutenant Thomas led the way, Zara and her rebels close behind. They breached the compound with swift, silent efficiency, the advanced human weaponry making short work of the guards. And then they were face to face with Odin himself, the alien mercenary's eyes widening in surprise as he recognized the human soldier. Thomas moved with a speed and precision that belied his youth, his rifle trained on Odin's heart. But the mercenary was not beaten yet. With a snarl, he activated a hidden device, and the world erupted in fire and smoke. Zara, seeing the danger, reacted with a speed born of desperation. She shoved Thomas and the others away, hurling herself at Odin as the explosion consumed them both. In the chaos, the Overseer made a break for freedom, but Captain Reeves was waiting. The grizzled veteran tackled the fleeing figure, the two of them rolling across the ground in a tangle of limbs. The Adoshan rebels swarmed forward, restraining the Overseer with ruthless efficiency. As the smoke cleared, Lieutenant Thomas knelt beside the scorched remains of Odin, his face a mask of grief and rage. The mercenary, barely clinging to life, met his gaze with a blood-flecked grin. Novak's voice crackled over the comm, steady and commanding. "Bring him in, Lieutenant. We need him alive. For Zara, and for all the others he's hurt." Thomas hesitated, his finger tightening on the trigger. But then he remembered Zara's sacrifice, the way she had given her life so that he might live. With a shuddering breath, he lowered his weapon. As the Vanguard fleet raced away from Orcs Prime, the weight of their new knowledge hung heavy in the air. The Empire's plans were more insidious than they had ever imagined, the threat more dire than they had dared to believe. But they had struck a blow today, had shown that humanity would not go quietly into the night. In the brig, Odin lay in a pool of his own blood, his breath rattling in his chest. The Overseer, stripped of his finery and his power, paced the narrow confines of his cell. And on the bridge, Admiral Novak stared out at the stars, her face set with unshakable focus. The road ahead would be hard, the battles to come fierce and unrelenting. But the Vanguard would be ready. For Earth, for the memory of Zara and all those who had fallen, they would fight to their last breath. The Empire had awoken a sleeping giant, and now the galaxy would tremble at the roar of humanity's defiance. The Vanguard fleet emerged from hyperspace above Earth, the once pristine orb now dripping with orbital defenses. Admiral Novak stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the interface as they approached. The weight of their captives and the intelligence they carried pressed upon her like a physical force. "Bring us into dock," she ordered, her voice steady despite the tension thrumming through her body. As the ships settled into their berths, teams of armed guards swarmed aboard, surrounding Odin and the Overseer. Lieutenant Thomas watched as they were led away, his fists clenched at his sides. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Captain Reeves, the older man's eyes understanding, but firm. "We did our job, son," Reeves said quietly. "Now it's time to let others do theirs." In the heart of the Pentagon, President Thorne convened an emergency council. Admiral Novak stood before them, her uniform crisp despite the grueling journey. As she spoke, laying out the intelligence they had gathered, the room grew deathly quiet. "The Empire has been playing us," Novak concluded, her words sharp and clear. "Every provocation, every attack, it's all been part of a larger strategy to weaken us and our potential allies before they strike." President Thorne leaned forward, his face grave. "And their ultimate goal?" "Full-scale invasion," Novak replied, calling up a holographic display. "They've developed a planet-killer superweapon. If we don't act now, Earth and every world that might stand with us will fall." The council chamber erupted into heated debate. Voices rose and fell, arguments flying back and forth. Through it all, President Thorne sat silent, his eyes never leaving the holographic display of Earth. Finally, he raised a hand and the room fell silent. "We have no choice," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision. "Activate the Omega Protocol." As the words left his mouth, klaxons began to blare throughout the complex. Across the planet, factories roared to life, assembly lines kicking into overdrive. In orbit, shipyards blazed with the light of arc welders as new warships took shape. Lieutenant Thomas found himself reassigned to a new task force, working alongside a newly arrived analyst named Mira. She was an alien refugee, her violet skin marked with intricate patterns that shifted with her mood. "The Empire's hierarchy is complex," Mira explained, her fingers dancing over a holographic display. "But there are weaknesses we can exploit." As they worked, Thomas felt some of the raw pain inside him begin to ease. There was purpose here, a chance to strike back at those who had taken so much from him. In deep space, the Vanguard fleet pushed forward under Admiral Novak's command. They clashed with Imperial Vanguard forces in a series of fierce engagements, each battle a test of human ingenuity against alien might. During one particularly brutal firefight, Novak's voice rang out over the comms. "Execute Maneuver Epsilon." The human ships broke formation, scattering in seemingly random directions. The Imperial ships followed, only to find themselves caught in a carefully laid trap. Human vessels struck from multiple vectors, their weapons finding weak points in the alien shields. As the last enemy ship exploded in a silent burst of flame, a cheer went up across the fleet. They had bloodied the Empire's nose, but Novak knew the real fight was yet to come. Back on Earth, Mira's eyes widened as she pored over the data from Odin's interrogation. "This can't be right," she muttered, double-checking her findings. Thomas leaned in, curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Mira looked up, her skin patterns swirling with excitement and trepidation. "I know where Odin comes from. It's Cyrix 7, a planet at the very heart of the Empire." Thomas's mind raced with the implications. "If we could strike there, we might be able to end this war before it truly begins," Mira finished. As word of this discovery spread, a daring plan began to take shape. Strike teams were assembled, ships were outfitted for deep penetration missions. In the White House, President Thorne prepared to address the nation, his words carefully chosen to rally humanity for the fight ahead. The Vanguard fleet hung in orbit, their hulls gleaming in the light of Earth's sun. On the bridge of the flagship, Admiral Novak studied the tactical displays, her mind already reaching out to the stars where the fate of humanity would soon be decided. Admiral Novak's eyes narrowed as she studied the holographic display of Cyrix 7, the heart of the Empire. The intelligence Mira had uncovered burned in her mind, a beacon of opportunity amidst the chaos of war. "All ships, prepare for slipstream jump," Novak's voice rang out across the comms. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, readying the ancient Vanguard vessels for the perilous journey ahead. As the fleet prepared to depart, Lieutenant Thomas stood before his assault team, a mix of hardened human veterans and alien rebels. The fierce Praxian warrior Kyla towered over the others, her scaled skin glinting in the harsh light of the hangar bay. "We have one shot at this," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the weight of the mission. "The Supreme Chancellor will never be more vulnerable than during this ceremonial transfer. We strike hard, we strike fast, and we don't look back." The slipstream opened before them, a swirling vortex of impossible colors. As the fleet surged forward, Thomas felt the familiar lurch in his stomach. His mind raced with the details Mira had provided, the layout of the ceremonial complex, the patterns of guard rotations, the crucial moments when their target would be exposed. They emerged at the edge of the Cyrix system, the Imperial homeworld, a gleaming jewel against the void. For a heartbeat, all was silent. Then chaos erupted. "Launch all fighters," Novak barked, her fingers dancing across the tactical display. "Cruiser groups, form up on me. We punch straight through their orbital defenses." Thomas's dropships screamed through the atmosphere, the hull glowing red-hot as they plummeted towards the sprawling capital. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky, a lethal web of energy bolts and missiles. The pilot, a grizzled Edosian veteran, wove through the barrage with inhuman precision. They touched down hard, the landing struts groaning under the impact. Thomas was moving before the ramp had fully lowered, his team fanning out into the shadowed streets of the alien metropolis. 3 minutes until the Chancellor reaches the transfer point, Mira's voice crackled in his ear. You need to move, Lieutenant. They fought their way through the city, encountering pockets of resistance. The Orcs guards were formidable opponents, their crystalline armor deflecting standard weaponry. But the humans had come prepared. Specialized disruptor rifles tore through the alien defenses, leaving shattered crystals in their wake. As they neared the ceremonial complex, a familiar figure stepped out of the shadows. Odin, the mercenary whose actions had sparked this war, stood before them. His cybernetic implants glowed with terrifying energy, his face twisted in a sneer. I should have finished you when I had the chance, human, Odin growled. Thomas didn't waste breath on a reply. He lunged forward, his combat knife a blur of motion. Odin parried with his energy blade, the air crackling with discharge power. They traded blows in a deadly dance, each seeking the other's weakness. In the end, it was Odin's arrogance that undid him. He overextended, leaving himself open for a fraction of a second. Thomas seized the opportunity, driving his knife into a gap in the mercenary's armor. Odin fell, his cybernetics sputtering and dying. Secure him, Thomas ordered, already moving towards their primary objective. We're taking him with us. They burst into the inner sanctum just as the Supreme Chancellor was completing the ritual transfer of power. The alien leader's multiple eyes widened in shock as Thomas's team swarmed the room. In the name of Earth and her allies, you're under arrest, Thomas declared, his weapon trained on the Chancellor's head. Outside, the space battle raged. Admiral Novak's tactics had caught the Imperial fleet off guard, but the enemy's superior numbers were beginning to tell. The Vanguard ships took hit after hit, their ancient hulls groaning under the strain. Admiral, we have the package, Thomas's voice came through the comms, requesting immediate extraction. Acknowledged, Lieutenant, Novak replied, her voice tight with concentration. All ships, prepare for emergency withdrawal. We're punching out of here hot. As the Praxian shuttles roared towards orbit, carrying their precious cargo, Captain Reeves's cruiser moved to cover their escape. The grizzled veteran ship took the brunt of the Imperial counterattack, buying crucial seconds for the others to reach safety. It's been an honor, Admiral. Reeves's final transmission crackled through the static before his ship erupted in a silent explosion. Novak allowed herself a moment of grief for her old friend before refocusing on the task at hand. All ships make the jump to slipstream. We're going home. As they hurtled through the swirling vortex, the captive Supreme Chancellor stared at his captors with a mix of fear and awe. Under Thomas's unwavering gaze, the alien leader activated a hidden communicator. This is Supreme Chancellor Zix Natar, he began, his voice trembling slightly. To all Imperial forces, stand down. I repeat, stand down. The humans have demonstrated their superiority. This war is over. Back on Earth, President Thorne received the news with a mixture of relief and trepidation. The war might be won, but the real challenge lay ahead. As his advisors argued over the fate of the Empire, Thorne's thoughts turned to the future. How would humanity handle its newfound power? What kind of galactic order would arise from the ashes of this conflict? In orbit, Admiral Novak watched the blue marble of Earth grow larger in the view screen. They had won a great victory, but she knew the true test was yet to come. The shape of the galaxy hung in the balance, and humanity's next moves would determine the course of history for millennia to come. Admiral Novak strode through the gleaming corridors of the Imperial Palace on Cyrix 7, her boots echoing on the polished floors. Alien architecture soared overhead, a testament to the Empire's former glory. But now, human technicians swarmed over control panels, methodically dismantling the old regime's systems. Status report, Novak barked as she entered the command center. A young officer snapped to attention. Ma'am, we've secured the central data core. Decryption is underway. Novak nodded, her eyes scanning the holographic displays. Across the galaxy, Imperial strongholds were falling one by one, but the war wasn't over yet. On Earth, President Thorne addressed the United Nations, his voice carrying to every corner of the planet. Today we stand at a crossroads, he declared. The Empire has fallen, but the shape of the future remains uncertain. We must move swiftly to fill the power vacuum before chaos consumes the galaxy. In orbit, aboard the Praxian warship Fang of Retribution, Captain Thomas oversaw the transfer of high-value prisoners. Odin sat in a reinforced cell, his cybernetic implants deactivated, a shadow of his former menace. A commotion erupted in the holding area. One of the Orcs guards, his crystalline armor glinting, had broken free of his restraints. Thomas reacted instantly, drawing his sidearm as he sprinted towards the disturbance. The Orcs warrior lashed out with inhuman strength, sending human guards flying. Thomas rolled under a sweeping blow, coming up inside the alien's reach. His combat knife found a weak point in the crystalline armor, driving deep. The Orcs fell, his body shattering into 1,000 glittering shards. Thomas stood over the remains, breathing heavily. "Secure the other prisoners," he ordered. "Double the guard rotation." Back on Cyrix 7, Mira's fingers danced over alien control interfaces, her skin patterns swirling with concentration. Suddenly, her eyes widened. "Admiral," she called, "I found something." Novak hurried over, leaning in to study the display. Encrypted data scrolled across the screen, slowly resolving into comprehensible form. "Exodus," Mira whispered. "It's real." Novak's eyes sharp. "Where?" "The derelict nebula," Mira replied. "But the coordinates are incomplete. We'll need to narrow down the search area." Across the sector, negotiator Paul Graves stood before the Planetary Council of Varas Prime. The mining world's atmosphere was thick with pollutants, a legacy of imperial exploitation. "The Empire is finished," Graves stated flatly. "Join us now, and we can build a better future together." The Varasian leader, his scales dulled by years of toxic exposure, leaned forward. "And if we refuse?" A distant explosion punctuated his words. Outside the council chambers, Thomas led a strike team through the industrial corridors of the mining complex. Mercenary defenders fell before their advanced weaponry and superior tactics. As the dust settled, Thomas's team uncovered shipping manifests deep in the facility's databanks. His eyes widened as he scanned the information. "Command, this is Thomas," he radioed. "You're not going to believe what we found here." In the swirling chaos of the derelict nebula, Grand Admiral Signor stood on the bridge of the Exodus. The massive vessel dwarfed even the largest Imperial battleships, its hull overflowing with weapon emplacements. "Status of the main cannon?" Signor demanded. A technician looked up from his console, fear evident in his multifaceted eyes. "Charging, Admiral, but the radiation from the nebula is interfering with power distribution." Signor snarled, his tentacles writhing with nearly unleashed rage. "Fix it! The humans may have won a battle, but this war is not nearly finished. With Exodus, we will reduce their homeworld to ash." Outside the twisted space-time of the nebula, the combined fleets of Earth and its newfound allies assembled. Admiral Novak stood at the helm of her flagship, studying tactical displays of the treacherous region ahead. "All ships, prepare for jump," she ordered. "We end this now." Admiral Novak's voice cut through the tension on the bridge. "All ships, initiate jump sequence. We're going in." The fleet surged forward, plunging into the swirling chaos of the derelict nebula. Alien energies crackled across view screens, bathing the bridges in eerie, shifting light. Captain Thomas stood aboard the Praxian stealth craft, his team's faces grim in the dim glow of emergency lighting. Kyla's scaled hands danced across the alien controls, guiding them through the treacherous currents of the nebula. "Approaching Exodus," Kyla hissed, her eyes fixed on the sensor readouts. "Signor's fleet is engaging the main armada." Thomas nodded, checking his weapon one last time. "Take us in. Radio silence from here on out." The stealth craft glided towards the massive form of Exodus, dwarfed by its impossible scale. As they neared a docking port, Thomas felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, his senses sharpening. With a muffled thud, they latched onto the hull. Thomas led the way, his team moving with practiced efficiency through the airlock. Inside Exodus, they encountered immediate resistance. Automated defense systems sprang to life, filling corridors with lethal energy bolts. Thomas ducked and rolled, his disruptor rifle spitting fire in return. "Push forward!" he shouted over the din of battle. "We need to reach the command core." They fought their way through twisting passageways, the ship's alien architecture a maze of sharp angles and pulsing biomechanical surfaces. Each step brought fresh waves of defenders, but Thomas's team had trained for this moment. Finally, they breached the command center. Grand Admiral Signor stood before a towering control interface, his tentacles writhing with impossibly strong fury. "Stand down, Admiral," Thomas called out, his weapon trained on the alien leader. "It's over." Signor's multifaceted eyes gleamed with fanatical intensity. "You understand nothing, human. Exodus is the Empire's salvation, our path to glory reborn." "There's no glory in genocide," Thomas countered, taking a cautious step forward. "Surrender now, and we can end this without further bloodshed." For a moment, it seemed Signor might waver. Then, with blinding speed, the Admiral's tentacles lashed out, activating hidden controls. Orcs guards materialized from concealed alcoves, their crystalline armor glinting in the harsh light. The command center erupted into chaos. Thomas dove for cover as energy bolts seared the air around him. He caught glimpses of his team engaging the Orcs in brutal close-quarters combat. Lieutenant Aya, Thomas's second-in-command, fought her way towards Signor. Her disruptor rifle blazed, shattering Orcs armor and clearing a path. "Sir," she shouted, "the firing core! We need to—" Her words were cut short as Signor himself struck, a biomechanical tendril piercing Aya's chest. Thomas watched in horror as she crumpled to the ground. With her last strength, Aya raised her rifle and fired. The blast struck the towering control interface, sending cascades of sparks and alien fluids erupting from its surface. Signor howled in rage, his tentacles flailing. "You've doomed us all!" He slammed a final control and klaxons began to blare throughout the ship. "Self-destruct sequence initiated," an emotionless voice intoned. "All personnel evacuate immediately." Thomas made a split-second decision. "Fall back," he ordered, his voice hoarse. "Everyone to the extraction point." As they retreated, Thomas cast one last look at Aya's fallen form. The weight of command bore down on him, the knowledge that he was leaving one of his own behind. They sprinted through disintegrating corridors, the very structure of Exodus coming apart around them. Thomas all but threw his remaining team into Kyla's waiting craft. "Go!" he barked as the airlock sealed. Kyla needed no further prompting. The stealth craft disengaged, rocketing away from the dying superweapon. Behind them, Exodus detonated in a silent explosion of impossible energies. The shockwaves struck like a physical blow, sending their small craft tumbling end over end. Thomas gripped his restraints, his stomach lurching as Kyla fought for control. As they stabilized, Thomas activated the comms. "Admiral Novak, this is Captain Thomas. Exodus has been neutralized, but at great cost. What's your status?" Static crackled, then Novak's voice came through, strained but determined. "We've taken heavy damage, Captain. Both our fleet and the Imperials are crippled. Signor is attempting to flee, but the nebula's got them pinned down." Thomas's mind raced, weighing options. "I'm patching through to Signor's command frequency," he said. "One last chance to end this." He took a deep breath, then opened the channel. "Grand Admiral Signor, this is Captain Thomas of the Earth Alliance. Your weapon is destroyed, your fleet in ruins. There's nowhere left to run. Surrender now, and we can still salvage something from this madness." Silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then finally, Signor's voice came through, defeated and bitter. "Very well, human. You have your victory." As the remaining Imperial ships powered down their weapons, Thomas leaned back in his seat, exhaustion washing over him. They had won, but the cost had been staggering. Admiral Novak's voice crackled over the comms once more. "All ships, prepare for withdrawal. We're heading home." As they limped out of the nebula, Thomas stared out at the stars, his thoughts turning to Earth and the challenges that lay ahead. The war might be over, but the real work was just beginning. The Allied fleet limped out of the derelict nebula, a patchwork of battle-scarred hulls and flickering shield emitters. Captain Thomas stood on the bridge of Admiral Novak's flagship, his eyes fixed on the holding cell monitor displaying Grand Admiral Signor. The once proud Imperial leader sat motionless, his tentacles limp and lifeless. "He hasn't moved in hours," Thomas muttered. Admiral Novak nodded grimly. "Victory often tastes like ash, Captain, but we have more pressing concerns." The comm system crackled to life, President Thorne's face appearing on the main view screen. "Admiral, I need you and Captain Thomas back on Earth immediately. We're convening an emergency summit to address the power vacuum left by the Empire's fall." Thomas felt a twinge of unease. "Sir, what about the captured Imperial forces? We can't leave them unsecured." "I've dispatched additional ships to oversee their transfer," Thorne replied. "Your expertise is needed here. We're walking a tightrope between rebuilding and sparking new conflicts." The journey back to Earth passed in a blur of strategy meetings and data analysis. As their shuttle descended through the atmosphere, Thomas caught glimpses of cheering crowds in the streets below. The euphoria of victory was palpable, but he knew the real challenges were just beginning. The United Nations chamber buzzed with tension as delegates from a dozen alien worlds took their seats. Thomas scanned the room, noting the mix of hope and wariness on faces both familiar and utterly alien. President Thorne stood at the podium, his expression grave. "We stand at a crossroads," Thorne began. "The empire that threatened us all lies in ruins, but the shape of our future remains uncertain. We must act swiftly and wisely to fill the power vacuum before chaos consumes the galaxy." As Thorne outlined plans for a new galactic order, Thomas noticed a split forming among the human delegates. Paul Graves, the skilled negotiator, passionately advocated for a coalition of united systems, a democratic alliance with humanity as respected leaders. But General Rhett Callahan, his face set in harsh lines, pushed for total human dominance over former Imperial worlds. "We cannot show weakness," Callahan growled. "The Empire nearly wiped us out. We must ensure it can never rise again, by any means necessary." The alien delegates stirred uneasily, and Thomas saw the fragile alliance beginning to fracture. He caught Graves's eye, receiving a subtle nod. It was time to act. Thomas stepped forward, his voice cutting through the rising murmurs. "If I may address the assembly." President Thorne nodded and Thomas took center stage. He looked out at the sea of faces, human, Praxian, Orcs, and a dozen others he couldn't name. "I've fought alongside many of you," Thomas began. "I've seen the cost of this war firsthand. Just days ago, I watched one of my own officers sacrifice herself to destroy the Empire's superweapon. Her name was Lieutenant Aya, and she believed in a future where all sentient beings could live in peace." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "We have a choice now. We can rule through fear, becoming the very thing we fought against, or we can build something new, a true alliance of equals, united in our shared desire for peace and prosperity." Thomas's gaze swept the room, locking eyes with delegates from world after world. "I've seen the strength of the Praxian warriors, the ingenuity of Orcs engineers. Every race here has something unique to offer. Together, we can create a coalition that stands against tyranny in all its forms." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of voices, some cheering, others arguing fiercely. But Thomas saw the seeds of change taking root. Over the next days, as debates raged and compromises were hammered out, a new galactic order began to take shape. Weeks later, Thomas found himself on Cyrix 7, the gleaming world that once served as the Empire's capital. As coalition attaché, he would serve as the link between Earth and this vital hub of the new alliance. The spires of the former Imperial Palace now flew the banners of a dozen worlds, a symbol of unity and hope. Zarina, the interim governor of Cyrix, met him in her office. Her eyes, multifaceted like shattered glass, reflected a weariness Thomas knew all too well. "Welcome to Cyrix, Captain," she said, her voice tinged with an accent Thomas couldn't place. "I wish I could greet you with better news." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. "What's happened?" Zarina activated a holographic display, showing a barren, cratered landscape. "Our long-range scans of Cyrix's moons detected something disturbing. An automated factory, hidden beneath the surface of the third moon. It's producing weapons, Captain. weapons that should not exist. The hollow image zoomed in, revealing swarms of microscopic machines. Thomas's eyes widened as he recognized the implications. Nanotech weapons? Zarina nodded grimly. A virus of unimaginable power. If released, it could consume entire worlds in a matter of days. We believe it was part of a dead man's switch, a final act of vengeance if the Empire fell. Thomas's mind raced. The fragile peace they'd built could shatter in an instant if word of this got out. He activated his comm unit, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his gut. This is Coalition Attaché Thomas. I need a secure line to Earth, and I want Praxian stealth ships here yesterday. We've got a situation that could blow this entire alliance apart if we don't move fast. As alarms began to sound and ships streaked across the Cyric sky, Thomas allowed himself a moment of grim reflection. The war might be over, but the battle to preserve their hard-won peace was only just beginning. Thomas strode through the corridors of the Deliverance, his mind racing with the implications of Zarina's discovery. The nanite threat on Cyrix's moons had been neutralized, but a far greater danger loomed on the horizon. "Captain on deck," Lieutenant Riza called out as Thomas entered the bridge. Admiral Novak turned from her tactical display, her face etched with concern. "Thomas, I've just finished briefing President Thorne. We're a go for Operation Frontier." Thomas nodded, his teeth clenched. "How soon can we depart?" "The Adocian vessels are already docking. We'll be underway within the hour." As if on cue, the ship's intercom crackled to life. "Praxian Stealth Squadron reporting in, Admiral. Ready to integrate with the fleet." Thomas felt a surge of pride at the assembled force. Humans, Praxians, Adocians. Former enemies united against a common threat. He keyed his comm unit. "Kyla, status report." The Praxian warrior's gravelly voice responded immediately. "My team is prepped and eager, Captain. We've loaded the latest intel from Zarina's analysis." "Good. Meet me in Briefing Room Alpha in 10 minutes. We need to coordinate our approach to the dead stars." As Thomas made his way to the briefing, he passed by the medbay. Through the transparent doors, he caught a glimpse of Zarina, her multifaceted eyes fixed on a holographic display of swirling nanites. The analyst's dedication was unwavering, even as exhaustion clearly weighed on her. The briefing room buzzed with activity as Thomas entered. Kyla stood near a star chart, her scaled skin glinting under the harsh lights. Adocian rebels huddled around a weapons schematic, their tentacles gesticulating as they debated in low whispers. "All right, people," Thomas called out, silencing the room. "We're about to venture into uncharted space in pursuit of a threat that could unravel everything we've fought for. Zarina's breakthrough has given us a fighting chance, but we're still flying blind." He activated the main holo projector, displaying a flickering image of the Dead Stars region. "Our target is the Cerulean Data Core, mobile, heavily defended, and packing enough destructive potential to make Exodus look like a firecracker." Kyla stepped forward, her clawed hand tracing a path through the holographic stars. The Dead Stars are a maze of gravitational anomalies and radiation hotspots. Our stealth capabilities will be pushed to their limits. An Adocian rebel raised a tentacle. "What about the Cerulean's defenses? If it created those nanite factories, we have to assume it has more tricks up its sleeve." Thomas nodded grimly. "Agreed. That's why we'll be operating in mixed-species strike teams. We need to be ready for anything." As the briefing continued, alarms blared throughout the ship. Admiral Novak's voice came over the intercom. "All hands, prepare for departure. We are now entering Phase 1 of Operation Frontier." Thomas felt the subtle shift as the Deliverance disengaged from its docking clamps. Through the briefing room's viewport, he watched as stars began to streak by, the fleet accelerating towards the unknown dangers that awaited them in the Dead Stars. The hunt for Cerulean had begun. The Deliverance shuddered as it plunged deeper into the Dead Stars region. Thomas gripped the command rail, his eyes fixed on the swirling chaos of gravitational anomalies and radiation hotspots that filled the main view screen. "Sensor contact," Lieutenant Reza called out. "Faint signals, multiple sources." Admiral Novak leaned forward. "Origin?" "Scattered throughout the sector. It's highly difficult to pinpoint. The radiation's playing havoc with our systems. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. Cerulean, he muttered. As if summoned by his words, a massive shape materialized from the crimson haze of a nearby nebula. The unmistakable silhouette of an Imperial destroyer, its cold drives glowing an eerie red. "Evasive maneuvers," Novak barked. The bridge lurched as the Deliverance banked hard. A volley of tungsten slugs streaked past, missing the hull by meters. "Return fire," Thomas ordered. The Deliverance's weapons blazed to life, but the rogue destroyer was already retreating back into the nebula's protective shroud. "All ships, form up," Novak commanded. "Praxian stealth fighters, scout ahead. We need to find that thing's blind spots." As the fleet regrouped, Thomas activated the ship-wide comm. "Boarding teams, prepare for immediate deployment. This is what we trained for." Within minutes, swarms of human assault craft and Praxian hunter-killers swarmed from the Deliverance's launch bays. Thomas watched from the bridge as they closed in on the Imperial destroyer, now visible again as it emerged for another attack run. The boarding teams struck with surgical precision, latching onto the destroyer's hull and burning their way inside. Thomas held his breath, knowing the troops would find no crew aboard, only the cold, implacable will of Cerulean controlling the ship from afar. "We've breached the main reactor," Kyla's voice crackled over the comms. "Setting charges now." A blinding flash erupted from the destroyer's midsection. The massive vessel listed, its weapons falling silent. But there was no time for celebration. The very fabric of space seemed to twist and distort around them. From the void emerged a nightmarish armada, thousands of constructs ranging from nimble fighters to colossal megastructures. Each one a patchwork of Imperial technology and cosmic debris, all pulsing with the same malevolent energy. "By the stars," Novak breathed, "it's Cerulean itself." Thomas's mind raced. They had known this confrontation was coming, but the sheer scale of what they faced was overwhelming. "Admiral," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his gut, "we need to find its control node. Everything else is just a distraction." Novak nodded grimly. "Agreed, but we'll need to punch through that fleet to have any chance." As the Deliverance's weapons powered up once more, Thomas turned to Zarina. The Cyrix analyst's multifaceted eyes flickered rapidly as she processed the incoming data. "There," she said, pointing to a distant segment of the Cerulean swarm. "That fragmented ring structure. It's drawing in matter at an exponential rate." Thomas studied the holographic display. Amidst the chaos of battle, he could see it. Dust and debris flowing towards a central point like water down a drain. "That's our target," he declared. "Novak, we need a breakthrough. I'll lead a ground team to that structure." The Admiral's expression was grim. "It's a long shot, Captain, but it may be our only chance." As the Coalition fleet engaged Cerulean's vanguard, Thomas assembled his strike force. Kyla and her Praxian warriors, a contingent of hardened human soldiers, and Zarina with her indispensable analytical skills. They boarded a stealth transport, its hull designed to slip past Cerulean's sensor web. As they accelerated away from the Deliverance, Thomas caught a final glimpse of the main battle. Energy lances and meteor-like projectiles crisscrossed the void, Coalition ships weaving through the onslaught with desperate skill. "Approaching the ring structure," the pilot announced. "Prepare for atmospheric entry." Thomas checked his gear one last time, then turned to address his team. "We don't know exactly what we'll find down there, but whatever Cerulean throws at us, we take it out. The hope of the universe depends on it." The transport shuddered as it plunged through layers of debris and shimmering energy fields. Thomas braced himself, knowing that the real battle was only just beginning.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.